Hello and welcome to the next webinar in the series on opioid use and addiction from Strengthening the Heartland. We're really happy to have you here. And before we get started and I introduce our speaker for today, I have a couple reminders and some housekeeping items that I just want to share with you. The first being that if at any point during the presentation you have questions, please feel free to type those into the chat box, and we'll wait till the end of the presentation and then I'll relay those questions to our speaker. Second, after the live presentation, you'll receive a survey link in an email to give us some feedback on the webinar. We really value that feedback. It helps us think of new topic ideas. And so some of you may have already completed that survey after viewing a previous webinar. We do ask that you click on that survey and do it each time you watch a new webinar. We like lots of feedback, so that really helps us out. If you're viewing this as a recording, you'll be able to find that same survey link in the same place where you found this recording. And lastly, we also have a YouTube channel where you can access all of our previous webinars. And if you go to YouTube and you search for Strengthening the Heartland, you'll see that channel. Once you're there, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That will notify you each time we add new content, or if you want to share that information with other people, please feel free to do so. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speaker for today, Amber Leafstedt, and she's going to talk about protective factors today. This was actually a topic requested by some of our viewers who are interested in maybe a little bit more of that prevention side of opioid misuse and addiction as well. So welcome, Amber. I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Letcher. I'm going to be the speaker today. My name is Amber Leafstedt. I am a licensed addiction counselor. I've done some webinars in the past, and as Dr. Letcher said, this kind of getting a little bit more information about protective factors kind of stemmed from touching briefly on it when we talked about adolescence and addiction. I have worked probably about six-ish years in the field of addiction, both at the inpatient level as well as the outpatient level, and so hopefully I can give you guys some useful information today in regards to this. So looking at kind of what's on the agenda for today. So in previous webinars kind of talked about what addiction is, but I think it's always helpful to kind of go back and remember some of those facts and kind of what this disease is. Also going to kind of look at what affects whether or not someone becomes addicted, because I think that's always helpful information to know, especially when we're looking at prevention or protection. And then we are, as well as looking at protective factors, we're also going to look at what puts us at risk. So kind of looking at the risk factors, but as well as what protective factors can give us some resiliency in order to kind of hopefully avoid having struggles with addiction or substance abuse. So to get started, just going to kind of watch a brief video that kind of goes into a review of kind of what addiction is and give us kind of a nice base to start off kind of this conversation. So I'm going to real quick.
What is addiction? It's also called a substance use disorder. Over 20 million people nationwide suffer from addiction.
It's good.
1 in 7 people will experience addiction at some point in their life. Scientists first began to understand addiction as a brain disorder back in the 1950s. Doctors Olds and Milner, in laboratory studies of rats, found the parts of the brain affected by addiction. But then in 1994, Drs. Volkoff and Schelberg, top neuroscientists, ran PET scans of the brain that showed the effects of substance use disorders. And like other diseases, these scans showed it affected tissue function. So there are 2 main parts of the brain affected by drug use: the limbic system and the cortex. The limbic system, located deep within the brain, is responsible for our basic survival instincts. So when you do essential things to stay alive, like eat, drink, find shelter, build relationships, or care for your young, your brain reinforces behaviors that cause the release of dopamine from this region. That reward for surviving is also transmitted to the amygdala and hippocampus, which record the memory of that feeling, so we seek it again. This is our survival hardwiring. Addiction also affects this area up here. That's the prefrontal cortex, which is what separates us from other animals. And this is where decision-making and impulse control live. When drugs or alcohol are used, they activate the very same dopamine process in the survival center. And when use is repeated, that substance can hijack that part of the brain. This hijacker changes the brain and weakens this system to make it believe that the primary need for survival is the drug. In hijacking the brain, it can usurp those primary motivations: food, water, shelter, relationships, and protecting our young. And the hijacker needs more and more of the substance to activate the same level of reward or feeling of pleasure, causing the brain tissue to become increasingly damaged with continued drug use. So why don't all people who use alcohol or drugs become addicted? There are factors that contribute to the development of a substance use disorder. They include individual factors like your genes, your age of exposure, and then environmental factors like drug availability. But there is good news. Addiction is preventable. Key factors that aid in preventing addiction can be categorized into two parts: risk factors and protective factors. Protective factors range from parental involvement, programs that improve self-control, limiting availability, and increasing attachment to your community. Another key element in preventing substance use disorders is to delay when use begins. Put simply, prevention is about delaying the onset of first use. In the adolescent brain, where brain tissue is more vulnerable, the hijacker is more prone to weaken the brain and plant itself as a disease. Those with substance use disorders commonly initiate first use much earlier, between 12 and 18 years old, which increases the likelihood of the hijacker taking hold. But if the hijacker does take hold, addiction is treatable. Advancements have been made in assessments, treatment programs, recovery supports, and medications to treat addiction. Brain scans show that once in recovery, the tissue in the limbic system and cortex can get better. With your help, we can expand these innovations to help millions of individuals and families and ensure that addiction is treated as the medical issue that it is. Together, we can solve this.
So as the video talked about, it touched on a couple of different things. And so one thing that I do want to emphasize is that all the information that we're going to be talking about today is based out of the concept of addiction being a disease. It's also going to be kind of a biopsychosocial look at addiction as well. There are other views of addiction, but this is the medical, biological disease concept of addiction that we're going to be talking about. As well as it touched on factors of kind of those factors that take part of whether or not somebody becomes addicted. And one of the things is looking at addiction as a lifestyle disease. So other lifestyle diseases include heart disease or type 2 diabetes. And it's a combination of a few things that determine whether or not somebody gets a lifestyle disease. So it's biology. So as the video mentioned, our hereditary kind of predisposition to said disease, and then our choices or environmental factors, or those different things that we have a little bit of control over, but the thing we don't have control over is our biology. And so our biology and our choices come together and ultimately equal the outcome. And so looking at some of those things and some of the things that the video touched on, we're going to go a little bit more in depth about and talk about, such as the individual factors, environmental factors. We're going to dive a little bit more deeply into those. Whoops. All right, let's pause that. Okay, so bringing it together. So basically, research has shown us that the risk for substance abuse and use disorders and other adverse behaviors basically increases with the number of risk factors that are there. So the more risk factors we have, the higher our risk is. But we also know that protective factors can reduce the risk individuals have, especially for youth, in engaging in things like substance use and other such behaviors. So again, to emphasize, there are factors that we can control versus factors that we cannot control. So as we go through and we talk about these different factors, kind of thinking about that, is that something that I have the ability to kind of enhance that protective factor or decrease that risk factor? And that's a big thing as both individuals, as families, as communities and agencies that we need to look at when we're thinking about prevention, is what aspect of these factors can we kind of have an influence over to either increase or decrease? Because we can't decrease whether or not somebody has family members who are addicted, but we can increase their resiliency. We can increase kind of the support and things that they receive, and kind of removal of that access and accessibility of drugs. So kind of looking at those factors, as well as I know the presentation is called protective factors in addiction, but we are going to be talking about risk factors. And that's because it's important for us to understand risk factors in order for us to understand protective factors, as well as kind of why they are protective factors. What are they looking to reduce? What are we looking to enhance versus have present? And so looking at these things. Okay, so as we go through these different risk factors and protective factors, we're going to be looking at it through a couple of different lenses. The first lens that we're going to look at it through is developmental stages. So the risk factors that exist for infancy or early childhood are not going to be the same risk factors and protective factors that are going to be as effective or as detrimental as the ones that are for like young adulthood. So it's really important for us to look at these different stages in order to kind of really understand what the risks are, what protective factors should we be focusing on, and what kind of warning signs should we be looking out for. The other area, as the video talked about, it really focused in on kind of those individual factors and environmental factors. We're going to kind of look at it through a couple of different lenses that are similar but a little bit different. So first, we're going to look at individual factors. So factors within the individual that put them at risk or are protective. Family factors. So this includes caregivers. This includes overall family. And then school, peers, and community, which can be seen as more environmental, but also isn't. It has a little bit more of a personal thing to it when we're talking about peers and the social aspect of some factors. So overall, this is how we are going to be kind of breaking down all of these kind of risk and protective factors. Okay, so the first area that we are going to talk about and look at for these factors are infancy and early childhood. And so this is really looking at ages from birth to like about 12 years old. And I know it seems like that's a lot of years to kind of clump together, but a lot of the different stuff that affect these age ranges are very similar. It does change a little bit as we kind of move through the years, but a lot of them remain the same. So one way that it remains the same is that one of the most important kind of factors or area of factors, as we said, the individual, family, school, peer, community, is family. So the caregiver in this age range, in this developmental stage, the caregiver and the family are going to be the most influential factors for this, whether it's risk or protective. And so some things to keep in mind, if you have any aware of kind of developmental stage models, kind of that Erickson stage model of like looking for that trust, mistrust, we're looking for attachments, right? And kind of the autonomy and shame and doubt. And so kind of looking at all of those things and remembering that there's a lot of stuff going on as we develop, whether it's physical development, cognitive development, emotional, social development. All of those things are playing a role. And that's where like the biopsychosocial viewpoint of addiction comes in, is that there are so many different factors that influence us as human beings. And so it's important to remember all of those. So what are some of the risk factors? So individual risk factors might be a difficult temperament. So this is young children who have a difficult time regulating, children who have a difficult time getting along with others, just overall that temperament. Again, emphasize, if a child has a difficult temperament, that does not mean that they will ultimately become addicted or have problem behaviors. It simply means that is a risk. And it's kind of like a little red flag to let us know, okay, maybe we need to enhance some things for some protective factors. And so then looking at that primary area of factors that we really need to pay attention to is the family. So one of the risk factors is having a cold and unresponsive behavior from the mother. So early in our lives, our caregivers are our primary source of security, of our safety, of our needs. And so when we have that cold and unresponsive kind of care going on from our primary caregiver, it can have detrimental effects on us, and our psychology and everything going forward. And then parental modeling of alcohol and drug abuse. So if our parents are using around us, even as small children, that's going to have an effect on us. It kind of starts off that norm that this is something that normally happens. And it is also very unlikely that if our parents are using substances, that we're getting adequately taken care of. Just because as we talk about addiction, it takes over your life. As that video mentioned, taking care of our house, taking care of our young, eating, sleeping, all of that stuff stops being as important to us. And so for children in this age range, or in this area, if their parents are using, it's unlikely that they're getting that treatment that they need and deserve, and that safety. And then school, peers, and community. I don't have much listed here because, again, the adults in their lives and the caregivers are kind of the most important factors going on. But that's not to say that these other areas aren't going to impact them. So if there's violence in their community, if there's not any safety as they kind of get into school age, if they're having a hard time getting along with other children at, when they get into elementary school, all of those things are going to be impacting them. But once again, we're kind of really emphasizing that family and that caregiver role as being one of the most indicative risk factors going on at this developmental stage. Okay. So protective factors. So now that we kind of have an understanding of some of the risk factors that can be going on and things that we need to know about. So how do we handle it? How do we enhance resiliency? How do we address these things? So some protective factors that will assist are things like teaching children self-regulation, right? So that is not something that children naturally have, their ability to calm back down once they become upset, how to regulate their behaviors, like not pushing their friends or biting other children, stuff like that. Those are things that we have to teach. And so we can enhance their resiliency and put some protective factors in place if we can help them learn that self-regulation. Having secure attachment with their caregivers and having secure attachment in general leads to safety and feeling loved and feeling secure. When we have anxious or detached attachments, it causes further difficulties for that child. Mastery of communication and language skills. Again, these are not skills that they normally just automatically have. Yes, all children kind of learn to start to speak and how to communicate, but they learn it from us. They learn it from the adults. They learn it from the caregivers in their lives. And the key point here is mastery, right? So we don't want them to just learn to talk. We want them to learn how to communicate. We want them to be able to use their words and move beyond kind of the behaviorism way of getting their needs met. We want them to be able to communicate. And their ability to make friends and get along with others. Again, that temperament. So are we teaching our kids the skills needed to get along, to regulate, to interact with others in meaningful ways and in positive ways? And you will notice that will carry on throughout the other developmental stages. So family, so having reliable support and discipline from caregivers. So again, reliable, we're having both support as well as discipline. So it's a balance of both. Having responsiveness, their needs are getting met, right? When they need something, when they're hurt, when they're happy, when they're all of the above, there's responsiveness from family, there's responsiveness from the caretakers. Being protected from harm and fear. Now, obviously, we can't protect children from everything. And once again, we want it to be a balance. They need to have experience, they need to meet other children and learn these skills, but we also need to protect them from things that might do them harm or cause irreparable harm. So things like adverse childhood experiences, right? So we don't want them to be abused. We don't want them to, be harmed in those ways. And then providing being given opportunities to resolve conflict. As parents, it might seem easier, or as caregivers, it might seem easier to just avoid conflict, jump in, solve it for them. We don't want them to fight. We don't want them to be upset. But it is also really important, again, for these children to learn how to resolve conflict in good ways, right? And so that goes along with being able to get along with others, that children are going to run into conflict. As adults, we run into conflict, and being able to learn those skills to become able to resolve that conflict on their own. Now, as children, we're probably going to be helping them a lot, but once again, foundation blocks for later in life. So this next one is not always possible for families, but having adequate socioeconomic resources for the family. So there are various reasons why a family might not have that or might struggle to provide that for the children or for the individuals in their family. And so while it's not always possible to have that, one thing that we can look at for prevention measures is having resources available and finding ways to ensure that others can achieve that and can work towards that and have the supports and are aware of what resources are available for them to work towards getting that the adequate resources that their family needs, so that they're fed, they have a safe place to sleep, they have food, they have water, they have clothes, they have jackets when it's wintertime, right? So all of these things, having those basic needs being able to be met is important. And then school, peer, and community. So they are given support for early learning. So while their brains are, they're learning languages and they're learning skills, and basically there's support there for that. And access, right? So being able to get into pre-K learning and pre-K programs, and then being available to everybody regardless of socioeconomic status. Access to supplemental services, again, for food, for seeing, for hearing, for everything. They have the access to the services that they need. Having secure and stable attachments, not only to parents, but also to child care providers. So in our society right now, our children go to daycare, our children go to Head Starts, they're not always in our home. And so it is important for them to also have that attachment with whatever care provider they are going to. Now, that also ties into the next part, which is a low ratio of caregivers to children. So at this age range, especially early on in their life, they're trying to get that attachment. And so the more change, the more caregivers that are thrown in the mix, the more difficult it is for them to kind of develop that attachment. We want to make sure when they're going to daycare that it's not an anxious situation for them, exceedingly so. Children are going to be anxious when they are away from their caregivers, but again, it's the exceedingly so. Or kind of the dysregulation that might happen. So regulatory systems that support high quality of care. So when it's, once again, access to high quality childcare, right? So we know when our children go somewhere that it's good and everybody has access to that. So again, as we look at these protective factors, there are certain things as an individual that I can change and I have control over. There are other things that it's going to take a lot of coordination and coming together and as communities in order to achieve that. I alone cannot make sure that there's always quality care, but as a community or as agencies that we can work towards achieving that. Okay, so as we move out of early childhood, we come into kind of that middle school age of kind of that 12 to 14 age range. So a big shift that we are starting to see happen here is we are moving from the most important factors being family and caregivers to our peer and social group. So these are going to be taking a little bit more of kind of that front and center of the factors that are impacting them the heaviest. So there's some major stuff that is happening here as well. We're kind of moving into that identity versus role confusions where I'm really trying to figure out who I am. I'm trying to figure out my place. I'm trying to kind of look towards autonomy and achieving those things. As well as brain development. There are a lot of transitions that happen during this time. We have puberty, we have developmental and brain changes. So some of the cognitive changes that they're going to be seeing is that they are going to be able to start thinking about possibilities. They're going to be able to start connecting ideas. The way in which they think begins to change. It is also notable that during the early adolescence, the prefrontal cortex of the brain does not develop as fast as other regions of the brain. And this is important because this area of the brain is used for things such as decision making, planning, and all of those things, and impulse control, which as we get into talking about these risk factors, those are all things that are notable. And so the fact of the matter is these risk factors, these kids at this age range are already kind of at a disadvantage because that area of their brain isn't quite fully online yet. And so it kind of emphasizes the need to have promotion of these things, but also teaching children these skills so that they can use them. Okay, so individual factors for middle school age range are things like poor impulse control. Again, if we think about the brain development, that area of the brain isn't exactly online. So it's normal for this age range to have a bit of difficulty with impulse control. But it's again, we're looking at kind of those extremes. So is there extraordinary difficulty with impulse control? And so looking at adolescents who have low harm avoidance. So are they constantly putting themselves in high risk situations, right? That's just naturally going to put them at a higher risk because they're less likely to avoid situations or things that they know were harmful, such as substance use. Sensation seeking. So again, if we think about the areas of the brain that addiction affects, there are limbic system, our reward centers, our pleasure centers of our brain. So if I'm an individual who responds more readily to that kind of reward and those sensations, right, that's going to put me more at risk, because if it's something that kind of activates that area of my brain, I'm going to seek that out. And so that's what substances can do for people. And so it can cause them to seek out things such as that. So lack of behavioral and self-control or regulation. So again, we're back to that kind of temperament stuff that is carrying on through early childhood, is my ability to regulate myself, regulate my emotions, regulate my behaviors. All of these things are factors that I need to look at that might put me at a disadvantage or at an increased risk for certain behaviors such as substance use. Aggressiveness, anxiety, depression, ADHD, or hyperactivity. All of these things also enhance my risk. Again, just because a child has these things does not mean that they will ultimately become addicted. It simply means that they are at a higher risk. Kind of the emergence of antisocial behavior. I'm not following rules. I don't want to follow rules. I have no respect for the rules. I kind of am very self-focused, right? Those are some risk factors. Having early persistent behavioral problems. So my behavioral problems, maybe from early childhood, continue to persist through this middle school range, and they're not really going away. And then again, early substance use, relating back to that video, the longer we can delay that first onset of use, the more protected that individual is going to be. So when we have early use between these ages, that's the higher risk. And as the video noted, for people who become addicted, most often it's normally between that 12 to 18 range that they first tried substances. So family, once again, is kind of moving away from that top spot, but family risk factors are still there, and they're still playing a role. So things are like permissive parenting. So I'm not really setting boundaries. I'm not really kind of putting in expectations. I'm just kind of letting things go the way they go. That's going to cause some problems. Having a lot of parent-child conflict, those types of things can be very difficult for children and difficult for families, and can kind of be a risk. So not really having any supervision or monitoring of the child, just kind of, once again, that permissive parenting style. Having low parental warmth, kind of, once again, that attachment. So having that kind of cold and unresponsive response from their parents. Inconsistent discipline. So not really knowing when or if I'm going to get disciplined, and then also the type of discipline. Is it hostile? Is it harsh? Is it unreasonable to whatever they're being punished for? So again, having consistency or inconsistency puts them at risk. So not really having any aspirations or kind of drive for the child, not pushing them or challenging them to kind of rise to any sort of expectations. Now again, that's having reasonable expectations, because we don't want to have unreasonable expectations as well of the child. Substance use among parents and their siblings is going to put them at risk, as well as parents and siblings having favorable attitudes towards alcohol and drugs. Because if my family is using, they think using's okay, they kind of promote using, the likelihood of me not using is very low, unless there are going to be other enhanced protective factors that are going to kind of be put in place, because it's normed. It's what I see, it's what I know, it's what I've been taught, and so those really put me at risk. So school, peers, and community, again, emphasizing peers are becoming the most important kind of group in their life at this point. So school failure and low commitment to school. So at this age range, I'm spending most of my time in school, and if I don't have a lot of commitment, if I'm not being able to succeed, that can lead to things such as like negative emotionality and things like that, or low commitment in school. Having accessibility and availability of drugs and alcohol. So it's around me, I have access to it. That increases my risk of doing it. Peer rejection, again, following through from early childhood into middle school, is that ability to make friends, that ability to effectively interact with other people, my temperament, right? So if I am unable to kind of master that, I'm going to experience more peer rejection at kind of at this stage. And if peers are becoming one of the most important parts of my life, and I have the inability to connect with that group, that's going to adversely affect me. Are my laws and norms in my society or in my state, in my town, favorable towards use? Now, that's not to say that just because alcohol is legal that I'm automatically at risk, but it does kind of how it's promoted. Is binge drinking promoted? Is abuse of these things promoted? Kind of those norms and those societal things that are influencing me. Having a deviant peer group. Do I have a peer group that is low harm avoidance? Are they constantly sensation seeking? Are they promoting substance use? Are they promoting other high risk behaviors? I like to tell some of the people that I see, if you sit at a bar long enough, you're going to order a drink. If you hang out with kids, if you hang out with peers who are doing something long enough, you're probably going to do that exact same thing, because we want to fit in. We want to feel as if we belong. And if everybody is doing that, I might start thinking, well, everybody's doing it, I might as well do it too. And so kind of that peer group that I'm around is going to have a major impact on me. Again, peer attitudes towards drugs. And then interpersonal alienation. Am I feeling connected to my community, to my friends, to my family, to a church group, to my culture, right? Am I feeling that connection? And when I'm not, that puts me at a risk. And then extreme poverty. The lack of resources, the inability to get my needs met is going to put me at a higher risk than somebody whose needs are being met. And it kind of notes here, especially for children who have antisocial kind of behaviors and thinking patterns going on, because I'm more likely to engage in illegal activities in order to get my needs met rather than finding other ways to get them met. So that's kind of how those two tie in. Okay, so moving from middle school age into adolescence. So this is like that high school age range from like 14, 15 to 18, 19. And so, oh, wait, no, I am on the wrong slide. I am talking about the slide ahead of me. Protective factors. Let's talk about protective factors. I am skipping ahead. So individual stuff, mastery of academic skills. So my ability to do well in school, again, this is taking up a large part of my life. And so the ability to kind of master and do well in these things. I'm following rules and norms of behavior at home, at school, in public, right? I am kind of meeting those expectations. Now, that's not to say that children shouldn't be unique and children shouldn't kind of challenge maybe some norms that need to be challenged, but it's the way in which that they are challenged, and that is notable. There are always going to be gray areas. And so when children are wanting to go against certain social norms, it doesn't automatically mean that this is what we're talking about. Again, gray areas. The ability to make good friends and have a good peer group relation. So again, this importance of peer group and my temperament and my ability to get along with others. So I'm having family, I'm having consistent discipline, right? And the discipline I receive at this point in my life should be language-based, not physical-based. And honestly, at other stages of life, it should really be both that as well, right? We need to be able to communicate and to talk and to understand versus any sort of physical discipline that might occur. Having extended family support. So again, I have those connections not only with my caregivers and my immediate family, but my extended family as well. I have a network, if you will, of that support. Having healthy peer groups, so for school peer and community, having healthy peer groups. So my peer group engages in healthy behaviors, whether that's clubs, activities, following the rules. We're not engaging in high risk kind of negative behaviors. School engagement. So I'm engaged in school, whether that's through sports, as well as having positive teacher relationships. So here are some things that as an individual, I might not necessarily have control over, but those are things like effective classroom management. So those things can come in the form of having reasonable classroom sizes, right? So having enough time for a teacher to individual time so that they can help enhance those students' ability to master their academic skills. This ties into kind of having high academic standards. So the importance of challenging our students and wanting our students to meet these standards, but at the same time, we need to have resources for them. We need to have supports for them. We need to give them the skills, the tools, the time, the support in order to achieve those things. If we have these high academic standards, yet we do not give them any resources in order to achieve them, we are setting them up for failure, because again, one of those risk factors is failure in school, low commitment to school. If I'm not having resources, if I'm feeling as if I can't achieve, I'm spinning my wheels, there's nothing I can do, my commitment to school is going to drop exponentially. And so being able to, yes, have those standards, yes, have that promotion of wanting them to succeed at school, but also giving them the resources and making sure we have an environment in which they can achieve those things. And then school policies and practices to reduce bullying. As we get into talking about adolescents, having a physical and psychological safety is an important thing. And so especially at this age range, having policies and practices that effectively address and handle bullying, as well as just overall safety is important. Okay, now back to that slide that I kind of already talked about that we weren't quite at yet. Adolescence. So again, that same age range that I noted, peers continue to be a important, notable area of their life. Erickson's developmental stages continue to be the identity versus role confusion. I'm still trying to achieve that. Of note here, though, is as we move into this adolescent stage, we are going to be starting moving more towards that autonomy and independence. It's going to be becoming more and more important at this time. And one big factor here is accessibility. How accessible and available are drugs or alcohol to me? Okay, so some of the risk factors here, behavioral disengagement coping is an individual factor. So this is means of coping of disengagement, right? So I'm isolating, I'm escaping, I don't want to face these things head on. And that type of coping can be very dangerous because it can lead into the use of substances. I don't want to feel sad, so I'm going to use a substance to make myself feel a different way. And so that type of coping can be very dangerous. Negative emotionality. I feel negative about myself. I feel negative about the things around me, and just overall kind of just that negative state of being. Conduct disorder. Again, I'm not following rules. I don't want to meet expectations. Very challenging, kind of that rebelliousness coming in negative ways, right? Rebelliousness in and of itself doesn't have to be a negative characteristic or feature, but it's the way in which it is occurring. So having favorable attitudes towards alcohol or drugs. If I look at them in a favorable light, I'm more likely to be open to trying them or being around those who are using them, which again puts me at risk. So early substance use, again, delay of use is going to be the biggest factor that can be protective for me, and continued antisocial behavior. Family. So substance use among my parents continues to be a very big factor. Lack of adult supervision. I'm not really being monitored. There's no sort of expectation or boundaries being put in place for me. I'm just kind of having rule of the roost. I kind of get to go do whatever I want. Poor attachment with parents. So yes, while peers continue to be an important aspect of my life, it is important for family and parents relationships to remain strong. And so when I have that poor attachment with my parents, that puts me at risk. School, peer, and community. So school failure and low commitment to school continue to be a high risk thing for them, because once again, I'm still continuing to spend most of my time in school, and so if I'm not engaged, that puts me at risk. So my continued association with peers who use drugs and alcohol is going to put me at risk. Aggression towards peers, so my ability to get along well with others and cooperate. norms in my society. So norms that are favorable towards alcohol use or drug use. So things like advertisement, social media, those types of things. And then my accessibility and availability. How accessible is it? How easily, readily can I get this thing? Okay. So for protective factors, so for individual positive physical development. So I'm hitting my milestones. I'm developing as I should, as well as how I feel about myself, how I actually feel about me, having a high self-esteem, enjoying who I am as a person. So having emotional self-regulation, there's a lot of emotions that go on in adolescence. And so being able to regulate those emotions effectively, having good coping skills and problem solving skills rather than that behavioral disengagement coping, right? I'm able to cope and face kind of what's going on head on and regulate what's going on with me. Having engagement and connections in 2 or more of the following contexts: at school, with peers, in athletics, employment, religion, or culture. Okay, so developing these connections. I feel connected to my society. I feel connected to my community. I feel connected to my family. I feel connected to what I am doing. There's a connection there, right? I don't have that interpersonal isolation going on. So my family is providing structure and limits, rules, monitoring, right? And it's predictable, right? So it's consistent. I'm never having to question. I'm never having to guess, right? And I can't push those boundaries. Those boundaries are there. Having supportive relationships with my family members. They're there for me. They support me. I have that connection. I have that attachment, that love, that safety there. And then I have clear expectations set for me. I know what the behaviors are expected of me. I know where the limits are. I know what the values are, right? Those are clear to me. For school, peer, and community, so having mentors and supporters who can help enhance my skills, help teach me, help guide me. I have those important role models in my life. Engagement at school and engagement with sports or activities is promoted, right? And I'm offered plenty of opportunities to do those things. Positive norms. So this also means that we have an open discussion with children and with young adults about alcohol and drugs, because the fact of the matter is they're going to be exposed to it, right? So we're being taught positive norms. We're being taught realistic norms rather than negative ones. Once again, having clear expectations set for me, and then physical and psychological safety, kind of going back to that bullying. I know I'm safe. My physical safety is ensured. My psychological safety is ensured. Okay, so young adulthood. We are now moving from childhood into young adulthood. This is kind of that college age range, late high school age range as we're moving into adulthood. So peer and social factors continue to play an important role. However, individual factors begin to take on significant importance as we move from kind of that childhood role into autonomy and independence. And we kind of start achieving these things as we kind of start to leave the nest. So a big factor here is social factor, the normed drinking habits, right? If I'm hanging around people who are binge drinking, I'm more likely to binge drink, right? Especially as we start reaching the age of 21, right? Because then it's legal for us to drink. It's no longer illegal for us to do so. So that accessibility becomes increased. And so it's important for us to understand low risk and high risk drinking related behaviors. And so one of those is the 0-1-2-3 guidelines. I don't know if anybody's kind of aware of what those are. And this is in regard to alcohol and alcohol alone. This is not talking about any drugs. So the 0-1-2-3 guidelines are low risk guidelines for alcohol consumption. It is not no risk, but it is low risk. And so it's 0 means I'm not drinking at all. I'm not having any at all. 1 means I'm having no more than 1 standard drink per hour. 2 means I'm having no more than 2 standard drinks no more than 2 standard drinks in one day. And 3 is no more than 3 standard drinks on any given occasion. And so those are the low risk guidelines. Okay, so what are some risk factors for this age range? So lack lack of commitment to conventional adult roles. So at this age range, I am moving again from kind of that childhood thing to autonomy and to independence. And so there are going to be responsibilities that I'm going to have to face and I'm going to have to meet, and I'm going to have to kind of start moving into this different role. And so if I have lack of commitment to that, or I'm not kind of rising to that developmental task, it's going to put me at risk. Continued antisocial behavior continues to put me at risk. For family, leaving home, right? And that's not to say that we shouldn't leave home, but that's just to say it's going to be a risk. It's a transition. We are going from hopefully a safety environment where kind of it was very structured to our own independent environment that might not, we don't know the norms. We're kind of setting it up as we go. And so just inherently that transition puts us at risk. Once again, doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It's risky. School, peer, and community. So not participating in future-oriented activities. Now, here a lot of people might say if you're not going to college, you might be at risk. But for me, I'm kind of looking at college, work, technical training, just in general, looking towards the future, looking towards transitioning from that previous life role of student and child alone to, okay, I'm an adult and now I need to be looking towards the future, whether that's continuing to be a student with work, with whatever it is, family, building a family. And then having substance using peers. So if I have peers who use, I'm more likely to use, and I'm more likely to use in the patterns in which they are using. So if they're drinking heavily, I'm more likely to drink heavily. So for protective factors, so identity exploration. So I'm able to explore what my values are in love, work, school, just in general. I'm able to really explore and begin to solidify myself in these areas. My status as an adult, right? So I understand what that role means. I'm able to meet the tasks of that role, right? I'm starting to feel self-sufficient and self-efficacy, right? I feel confident in my ability to do these things, whether that's paying my bills, going to work, whatever it is. I'm able to meet these tasks, and I'm able to meet these tasks successfully, right? I continue to be future oriented and achievement focused, so I'm able to kind of work towards achieving things for myself. So family, I'm starting to be able to balance my autonomy with my family connections. Again, it's important for us to be able to have both. So I'm developing that independence, but I'm also maintaining those connections that I've developed hopefully throughout my life. And then behavioral and emotional autonomy. I am responsible for my emotions. I am responsible for my behaviors, and I'm aware of my responsibility, my accountability to those, right? So I have that regulation. I have that ability to be in control. School and peers and communities, right? So I'm provided opportunities to explore and work in school and to kind of work towards that future that I want. And then I feel connected to adults outside of my family and maintain those connections. Okay, so I just unloaded a whole lot of information to you guys, and whether or not all of it sticks, you have the handout, so hopefully you can kind of go back and look at it as you need. But some major takeaways. So first and foremost, we need to delay use. That is what prevention is. We need to delay first use, first onset of any sort of substance use. That is going to be the biggest factor, because you can't become addicted to a substance if you don't use it. So if we can prevent people from using it and delay the first time they use it, the better off we're going to be. Okay, next one is we need to have stable and supportive and consistent parent-guardian relationships, right, with our children. So it's stable, it's supportive, it's consistent, right? We're able to form those attachments, because those attachments impact so many of those different risk factors that we were talking about, the ability to get along with others, my emotional regulation. All of those things can be tied back to that attachment. Right. And then we promote school and community environments that promote personal and emotional safety. Right. So we begin to have in these environments that I'm able to be safe in, I'm able to be securely attached in, as well as promoting kind of, as we talked about, those school environments that have supports, that have resources, that lift every single one of those students up, and doesn't kind of leave anybody behind. Increase our ability to self-regulate and respond to situations in self-enhancing ways. So we're giving people skills. They're able to regulate, they're able to cope in ways that are helpful. And then we need to increase our ability to kind of be in control of that. We also need to limit our exposure, to substance abuse, right? So whether it's in the family, in our community, through the media, the exposure to substance use norm substance use, and it increases that accessibility and availability, and we need to decrease those. So we need to limit that exposure. And then we need to talk about substance use and the risk of addiction in helpful ways versus scare tactics, right? Because addiction is a real thing. And as much as we would like to enhance all of these protective factors and decrease all of these risk factors, the fact of the matter is there's still going to be exposure. There's still going to be availability and accessibility at some point in time in our lives. And so it's important for us to give children, yes, children, not just adults, information about alcohol and drugs and opiates and all of them. We need to give people information and talk, have real conversations about the dangers and not just the scare tactics version of them. And so we need to talk about those things. All right, so the last thing I have here is a resource, and it's from NIDA, and it's a prevention resource. And if you follow the link that's on here, it will take you to kind of the principles of kind of this prevention approach in communities. So that is what I have for risk factors and protective factors. I hope some of it has been informational. I think we have some minutes left if we have some questions. I'm not sure if there were any questions throughout the presentation or not.
Thank you so much, Amber. If you do have any questions, feel free to type those into the question box right now. We do have a couple of minutes, so feel free to do that as you're typing or thinking. I'll also draw your attention to the chat box where we've linked our YouTube channel as well as the survey link for this webinar, so you'll have access to those. And again, we always appreciate feedback, so feel free to send in those comments. As we wait, I'll give a few minutes, sometimes a slow typer, so we'll give them a chance. But one thing I noticed, Amber, that came through in your presentation was just how important relationships are, regardless of who it's with, but how protective those relationships can really be.
Yeah, definitely. And it's having that connection, that connection with others, and kind of really avoiding that isolation and that ability to kind of we're social creatures at heart, and so being able to kind of have that connectedness and have that attachment and that meaning and purpose with other people.
Yeah, I think it's helpful for anybody who works as a service provider too, to know that your relationship really makes a difference, as well as having parents or friends. So
yeah.
I noticed in one of your slides, your early slides, I think noted a risk factor can be maybe lack of responsiveness from mothers specifically. And I know sometimes that gets, can make people a little bit uncomfortable. But I thought it's nice to point out that that comes from research findings that have primarily been done with women, and women are more likely to respond to research studies. So sometimes that we get that result, but it's really caregivers in general.
Yep. And I think it said mothers, but I tried very hard to say caregivers, and it's primary caregivers. So it's whoever is providing the care, and that can come from, a mother or father or guardian, even just it's the caregivers that kind of having that attachment with those caregivers is what's important.
Yes. Yep. All right. I don't see any questions, but if anybody has some, feel free to put those on the survey as well. We're happy to address them at a later time. I'll put another plug in for our YouTube channel. Feel free to check those out and share them. And thank you so much to you, Amber, and also to all of our attendees. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.